The rain fell in heavy sheets over São Paulo, turning the narrow alleys of the favela into rivers of mud that clung to Clara's worn-out sneakers as she pedaled her rickety bicycle through the night. Her cart, a patchwork of salvaged metal and warped wood, rattled behind her, filled with the day's haul of recyclable bottles and cardboard scraps. At 28, Clara had learned to navigate these streets with an almost supernatural sense, knowing every dented trash can and hidden corner where treasures might hide. Her hands, calloused from years of sorting through the city's refuse, gripped the handlebars tightly, her breath visible in the chilly air. She was invisible to most, a shadow in a city that glorified wealth. But Clara carried a quiet pride, instilled by her late mother's words. Kindness is the only currency that never runs out. Tonight felt heavier, though, the air thick, with something more than rain. As she turned into a narrow passage behind a row of shuttered shops, her bike skidded to a stop. There, sprawled among torn garbage bags and sodden newspapers, lay a man, his body limp against the wet pavement. His suit, though ripped at the shoulder and stained with grime, was unmistakably expensive, the kind Clara only saw in the trash of the city's elite neighborhoods. His face was pale, a streak of blood trailing from a gash on his temple, mixing with the rainwater pooling around him. Clara's heart thudded. She'd seen drunks and vagrants before, but this man was different. His polished shoes, the glint of a gold watch on his wrist, the faint smell of bourbon that cost more than her monthly earnings. For a moment she considered leaving him. The favela was no place for heroics, and strangers could be dangerous. But then she saw his chest rise unevenly, a soft groan escaping his lips, and her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Clara dismounted, her sneakers sinking into the mud, and knelt beside him. "Hey, senor, you alive?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No response. She touched his shoulder, then shook him gently. Another groan, but his eyes stayed closed. The rain pounded harder, soaking her thin jacket, and Clara's mind raced. Her shack was no palace, just plywood walls and a leaky tarp roof, but it was dry, and this man wouldn't survive the night out here. She glanced around, the alley empty except for the distant hum of a bar's music. With a strength born of necessity, Clara hoisted him up, his weight nearly toppling her into the mud. His mumbled words, "No, please don't," were slurred, incoherent, but they tugged at her heart. She maneuvered him into her cart, his body slumped among the plastic bottles, and began the slow, arduous journey home. The wheels squeaked. In protest, the rain stung her face, but Clara pedaled on, her breath ragged. Her shack came into view, a humble refuge lit by a single flickering bulb. Inside, she dragged him onto her only mattress, a thin foam slab she'd scavenged months ago, and lit a candle to see him clearly. His face, now illuminated, was striking. Sharp jawline, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a vulnerability that didn't match his fine clothes. As she wiped the blood from his temple with a damp cloth, Clara noticed a tattoo on his chest, revealed by his torn shirt, a lion encircled by Latin words she couldn't read, intricate and regal. Her breath caught. Who was this man? A criminal? A lost soul? Her hands shook as she bandaged his wound, doubt creeping in. What if she'd invited trouble into her home? Yet, as she watched his uneven breaths, a strange warmth settled in her chest. She'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to know that leaving him would have been easier, but Clara couldn't abandon someone so broken, not when she'd spent her life piecing herself together from scraps. She sat back, the candlelight flickering, and whispered, "You're safe now, whoever you are." The rain drummed on the tarp above, and Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the stranger, her heart torn between fear and hope, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The morning sun pierced through the cracks in Clara's shack, casting thin beams of light across the stranger's face as he stirred on her scavenged mattress. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling green that reminded Clara of the emerald. Glass bottles she sometimes found in the trash, rare and beautiful. Confusion clouded his gaze as he tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his temple. "Where am I?" he murmured, his voice hoarse, almost drowned out by the distant clatter of the favela waking up. Clara, who had barely slept, perched on a crate in the corner, jumped to her feet, smoothing her worn skirt. "You're in my home," she said softly, approaching him like one might a stray dog, cautious but kind. "I found you last night, passed out in an alley. You were hurt." He touched the bandage on his forehead, his fingers trembling, and looked around at the plywood walls, the tarp ceiling swaying slightly in the breeze, and the single cracked chair that served as her only furniture. His expression wasn't one of disdain, as Clara had braced herself for, but something softer, bewilderment, perhaps gratitude. "I don't remember anything," he said, his voice breaking. "Not my name, not how I got there. Nothing." Clara's heart sank at the panic in his eyes, but she kept her tone steady. "That's okay. You took a bad hit to the head. Maybe it'll come back." She hesitated, then offered, "I'm Clara. What should I call you?" He blinked, as if the question was a lifeline, and after a moment's thought, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Lucas. Let's go with Lucas." The name felt right to Clara, like a character from the tattered storybooks her mother used to read to her, tales of heroes, lost and found. She nodded, hiding her own nerves. "All right, Lucas, you hungry?" His nod was eager, almost boyish, and Clara busied herself at her makeshift stove, a single burner powered by a gas canister. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the small space, and paired them with a few day-old rolls she'd saved. As they ate, sitting cross-legged on the floor, Lucas studied her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Why did you help me?" he asked suddenly, his fork pausing mid-air. "You could have left me there." Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "My mom always said helping someone in need is like planting a seed. It grows into something good, even if you don't see it right away." Lucas's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of his lost memories seemed to lift. "Your mom sounds wise," he said, and Clara felt a pang. She hadn't spoken of her mother in years. They fell into an easy rhythm, talking about small things, the way the favela's roosters never seemed to sleep, the best spots for finding recyclable treasures. Lucas's manners were polished, his speech careful, hinting at a life far removed from Clara's, yet he listened to her stories with genuine curiosity, laughing when she described outsmarting a raccoon for a bag of cans. But beneath the warmth, a mystery lingered. Clara noticed details that didn't add up, a monogrammed cufflink with the initials GS tucked into his pocket, the way he instinctively adjusted his posture as if used to commanding a room. When she asked about his past, his face clouded and he rubbed his temples, muttering about fleeting images, a glass skyscraper, a woman's sharp voice, a suffocating sense of pressure. "It's like trying to grab smoke," he said, frustration lacing his words. Clara's heart ached for him, but she also felt a prickle of unease. Who was Lucas, really? As the day wore on, she lent him a neighbor's oversized shirt and pants, the fine suit too ruined to salvage. Lucas insisted on helping her with chores, his clumsy attempts at washing dishes earning a rare laugh from Clara. By evening, they sat outside her shack, the air cooling as the favela buzzed with life. Children kicking a deflated soccer ball, music spilling from a nearby radio. Lucas watched it all, his green eyes distant yet content, as if this chaotic, vibrant world was both foreign and comforting. "This place," he said quietly, "it's alive in a way I don't think I've ever known." Clara smiled, but her mind churned. She'd given him her only bed, her food, her trust. But what if his past came knocking? What if he belonged to a world that would never accept her? Yet as the stars emerged above the tarp roofs, Lucas turned to her, his voice earnest. "Clara, I don't know who I was before, but I know I'm grateful for you. You didn't have to do this, but you did." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, stirring feelings she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She wanted to believe in this moment, in the man sitting beside her. But the tattoo on his chest, a lion, proud and enigmatic, whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered. Across the city, in a sleek office tower, urgent voices echoed through a boardroom, demanding answers about the disappearance of Gabriel Santos, a tech mogul whose absence threatened to unravel a corporate empire. Clara and Lucas, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the favela, shared a quiet moment under the stars, their connection fragile but growing, a spark of hope in a world divided by wealth and want. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a dream. Clara hadn't dared to imagine, as Lucas became a quiet but steady presence in her life. Each morning they set out together, Clara pushing her creaky cart through the favela's bustling streets, Lucas walking beside her, his borrowed clothes now, dusted with the grit of their work. At first, she hesitated to let him join her trash-collecting rounds, embarrassed by the stench and the stares from neighbors. But Lucas insisted, his green eyes bright with determination. "I want to help," he said, hefting a bag of cans with a grin that made her heart skip. Clara taught him the art of sorting, plastic from glass, cardboard from metal, her hands guiding his as they worked under the searing São Paulo sun. He was clumsy at first, dropping bottles and misjudging weights, but his eagerness to learn disarmed her. They shared moments of unexpected joy, Lucas laughing when a stray dog stole a scrap of bread from their lunch, or Clara teasing him for flinching at the smell of rotting fruit. The favela, once a place of survival for Clara, began to feel alive, with possibility. Neighbors, initially skeptical of the stranger in their midst, softened as Lucas lent a hand, fixing a child's broken toy, hauling water for an elderly woman, or kicking a soccer ball with barefoot kids in the dusty square. His presence drew curious glances, but also warmth, as if he belonged. Clara noticed how he listened to people, not with pity but with genuine interest, asking about their lives in a way that made them feel seen. One afternoon, under a sprawling mango tree, they shared a lunch of roasted corn and coconut water, the air thick with the hum of cicadas. Lucas watched a group of children chase a kite, his face softening. "This place feels more like home than anything I can't remember," he said, his voice low. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of his unknown past loomed. She caught glimpses of it in small moments, the way he absent-mindedly traced the lion tattoo on his chest, or how his hands moved with precision when tying a knot, as if trained for finer tasks. At night, they lay side by side on her thin mattress, the tarp roof rustling above, and talked about dreams. Clara shared her secret wish to open a small shop someday, selling crafts made from recycled materials. Lucas listened, his eyes tracing her face in the candlelight, and said, "You'd make it beautiful, Clara. You see value where others don't." His words stirred something deep within her, a warmth she hadn't felt since her mother's stories filled her childhood nights. But the flashes of memory that haunted Lucas grew sharper, blurred images of a glass-walled office, a woman's cold laughter, a suffocating weight of expectation. He kept them from Clara, not wanting to shatter the fragile peace they'd built. One evening, as they sorted glass bottles by the light of a flickering bulb, he froze, his hands trembling. "For what's wrong?" Clara asked, touching his arm. He shook his head, forcing a smile. "Just a headache," he lied, but the image of a heated argument, papers strewn across a desk, lingered like a storm cloud. Clara sensed his unease, but didn't press, her own fears growing. What if he remembered everything and left? What if this life, her life, was just a temporary refuge for him? The favela's rhythm continued, vendors calling out music spilling from open windows, but Clara felt a shift, a quiet tension building. Lucas, too, wrestled with his heart. He was falling for Clara, her strength, her laughter, the way she made a shack feel like a sanctuary, but the fragments of his past suggested a world that might not welcome her, and the thought of losing her terrified him more than his lost memories. Meanwhile, across the city, in a towering skyscraper, Mariana, Gabriel's business partner, paced her office, her sharp heels clicking against marble. She'd been milking his absence, steering their tech company toward a risky merger that would cement her control. But whispers of Gabriel's survival reached her, carried by a private investigator she'd hired. "Find him," she snapped. Into her phone, her voice icy. "I don't care where he's hiding. We can't afford loose ends." In the favela, Clara and Lucas remained oblivious to the eyes watching from afar, their days filled with shared work and quiet moments of connection. One night, as they sat on a crate outside her shack, the sky ablaze with stars, Lucas took her hand, "Clara," he said, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "Whatever happens, whoever I was, I want you to know you've given me something I didn't know I needed. A reason to keep going." Clara's throat tightened, her fingers curling around his. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that his presence had filled a void she'd carried for years, but fear held her back. The lion tattoo, the cufflink with GS, the life he couldn't remember, they were reminders that this happiness might be fleeting. As the favela slept, their hands stayed entwined, a silent promise in a world that felt both infinite and fragile, while the city beyond plotted to pull them apart. The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Clara lay awake, the faint snores of Lucas beside her on the mattress, a reminder of the fragile world they'd built in just 2 weeks. But that night, everything shattered. Lucas jolted upright, gasping, his green eyes wide with a flood of memories that crashed through the fog of his amnesia. He was Gabriel Santos, CEO of Santos Tech, a billionaire whose empire was crumbling in his absence after a brutal argument with his business partner Mariana, who had pushed for a merger he opposed. The memory of that night, the bar, the bourbon, the shadow of a figure striking him, hit like a tidal wave, leaving him trembling. Clara stirred, her voice soft with concern. "Lucas, what's wrong?" He couldn't meet her eyes, the weight of his true identity pressing down. "I remember," he whispered, his voice raw, "everything." Clara sat up, her heart pounding, sensing the shift in him. He told her the truth, his name, his wealth, the attack that left him in that alley. Her face paled, but she listened, her hands twisting the edge of her worn blanket. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, already bracing for the pain. Gabriel wanted to deny it, to promise he'd stay, but the reality of his company, his employees, the millions at stake, loomed like a guillotine. "I have to fix things, Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "But I'll come back, I promise." She nodded, her eyes glistening, but said nothing, the silence heavier than any words. Before dawn, Gabriel wrote a note. "Clara, you've given me more than I can ever repay. I have to face my past, but my heart stays with you. Wait for me, Gabriel." He slipped out, leaving the note by her pillow, each step away from the shack tearing at him. Clara woke to an empty mattress, the note crumpling in her hands as she read it. Tears fell, hot and silent, as betrayal sliced through her. She'd opened her home, her heart, only to be abandoned by a man whose world was galaxies apart from hers. The favela's morning clamor, roosters crowing, vendors shouting, felt hollow as she pushed her cart alone, the streets echoing with memories of Lucas's laughter. Neighbors asked about him, their eyes kind but curious, and Clara forced a smile, muttering vague excuses. Deep down, she convinced herself Gabriel had used her, a rich man playing at poverty for a fleeting escape, leaving her to pick up the pieces. She threw herself into work, sorting bottles with fierce determination, but every discarded item felt like a reminder of her own disposability. Across the city, Gabriel stepped back into his penthouse, the sterile luxury a stark contrast to Clara's warm shack. His assistant, João, nearly dropped his coffee. "Señor Santos, we thought you were dead." Gabriel ignored the questions, demanding his phone and laptop. The news was grim. Santos Tech was bleeding money, Mariana pushing the merger with predatory confidence. He drove to the office, his tailored suit feeling like armor he no longer wanted, and confronted Mariana. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing, but Gabriel saw the flicker of fear beneath her polished facade. "That's not your concern," he snapped, reclaiming his desk. But the boardroom felt suffocating, every contract and email a reminder of the life he'd hated, a life without Clara. He tried to focus, signing papers, answering calls, but her face haunted him, the way she'd smiled under the mango tree, the trust in her eyes now broken. Mariana, sensing his distraction, began to dig, hiring her investigator to track his movements during his absence. Days turned into weeks, and Gabriel's heart grew heavier. He wanted to return to Clara, but how could he face her after leaving, without a proper goodbye? Meanwhile, Clara's pain hardened into resolve. She sold her recyclables, saved every cent, and began sketching designs for her dream shop, determined to prove she didn't need Gabriel's world to rise. But one evening, as she passed a newsstand, a headline froze her. Gabriel Santos returns. To lead Santos Tech. A photo showed him polished and commanding, nothing like the vulnerable Lucas she'd known. Her chest tightened, confirmation that he'd reclaimed his gilded life, leaving her behind like trash. She ran home, collapsing onto her mattress, the note still tucked under her pillow, its words now mocking. "Wait for me," he'd written, but why should she? The city's divide, wealth glittering in skyscrapers, poverty clawing in the favelas, felt insurmountable. Yet in Gabriel's penthouse, sleep eluded him. He stood on his balcony, staring at the sprawl of São Paulo, the favela's lights a faint glow in the distance. He clutched the cufflink Clara had found, its GS engraving a tether to the man he'd been with her. The emptiness of his old life, endless meetings, shallow connections, paled against the warmth of her shack, her laughter, her touch. He made a decision. The next morning he called João. "Find Clara Almeida in the favela near Rua das Flores. Offer her a job at Santos Tech. Community liaison, good pay, full benefits." João hesitated but nodded, sensing the weight behind the request. When João arrived at Clara's shack, his polished car drawing stairs, Clara's eyes narrowed. "A job?" she asked, her voice sharp. "From Gabriel." João nodded, handing her a contract. "He says you'd be perfect for it." Clara's first instinct was to tear it up, to reject what felt like pity, but the numbers on the page, enough to fund her shop, to change her life, made her pause. She thought of her mother's words about seeds of kindness, wondering if this was one returning to her, or a trap to pull her into Gabriel's world. "Tell him I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady, but her heart racing. João left and Clara stood alone, the contract trembling in her hands. Accepting it meant facing Gabriel again, risking her heart, but also proving she could stand tall in his world. As she stared at the city skyline, the weight of her choice settled in. Gabriel, in his office, waited for her answer, knowing this was his only chance to bridge the gap he'd created, unaware that Mariana's investigator had found Clara's shack, her report landing on Mariana's desk with a photo of Clara and a note. "She's the key to Gabriel's downfall." The city pulsed with secrets, and Clara's next step would pull her into a battle she never asked for, one that would test her heart and her strength. Clara stood outside the towering glass facade of Santos Tech, her heart pounding as she clutched the contract that could change her life. The decision to accept Gabriel's job offer as a community liaison had been agonizing, her pride warring with the promise of a better future. She'd spent the weekend sewing a simple blouse from second-hand fabric, determined to walk into this new world with dignity, not as a charity case. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble and chrome, a stark contrast to the muddy alleys of her favela. The receptionist, a polished woman with a tight smile, led Clara to the 30th floor, where Gabriel waited in a sleek office that overlooked São Paulo's skyline. His green eyes lit up when he saw her, but Clara kept her expression cool, her voice steady. "I'm here for the job, Señor Santos, not for anything else," she said, cutting off any hope of rekindling their past. Gabriel nodded, his face a mix of relief and regret, and introduced her to Mariana, his business partner, whose sharp gaze and cold handshake sent a chill down Clara's spine. Mariana's smile was thin, her words laced with condescension. "A community liaison from the favela. How inspiring," she said, her tone implying anything but admiration. Clara ignored the jab, diving into her role with fierce determination. She organized outreach programs, met with local leaders, and proposed initiatives to support favela workers, her ideas grounded in the realities she'd lived. Her colleagues, initially skeptical of the trash collector in their midst, began to respect her sharp insights and tireless work ethic. Gabriel watched from a distance, his heart aching at the professional wall Clara had built, but he respected her boundaries, focusing on stabilizing Santos Tech. Meanwhile, Mariana's schemes deepened. She saw Clara as a threat, not just to Her merger plans, but to Gabriel's focus. Late at night, she tampered with Clara's computer, planting fake emails suggesting she was leaking trade secrets to competitors. She spread whispers among the board, painting Clara as an opportunist, exploiting Gabriel's kindness. Clara sensed the hostility, colleagues' sidelong glances, hushed conversations, but she pushed forward, her mother's words about perseverance echoing in her mind. One afternoon, while reviewing a report, Clara found a file she hadn't created, detailing Santostech's confidential patents. Alarmed, she confronted Gabriel, who frowned, his instincts screaming foul play. "This isn't you, Clara," he said, his voice firm. "Someone's setting you up." Their eyes met, a flicker of their old connection sparking, but Clara pulled back. "Then find out who," she said, her tone sharp. Gabriel's suspicion fell on Mariana, but without proof he couldn't act. Their tension erupted into arguments, Clara insisting on legal proof, Gabriel pushing for bolder moves. "How you can't just storm into her office," Clara snapped during one heated exchange in the break room. "And you can't wait while she ruins you," Gabriel shot back, his frustration boiling over. Their voices drew stares, and Clara stormed. Out, her heart torn between anger and the lingering pull of his sincerity. Days later, a board meeting turned disastrous. Mariana presented evidence of Clara's betrayal, forged emails, doctored files, even a staged photo of Clara meeting a rival executive, actually just a street vendor she'd helped. The board, already wary of Gabriel's judgment after his disappearance, demanded Clara's termination. Gabriel stood, furious. "This is a lie, and I'll prove it," he declared, but Mariana's calm rebuttal swayed the room. "Gabriel, your attachment to this woman is clouding your judgment," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. Desperate, Gabriel hatched a plan to access Mariana's private server for proof, ignoring Clara's warnings. That night, he broke into her office, only to trigger a silent alarm. Security caught him, and by morning he was in custody, charged with trespassing. Clara, unaware of his plan, arrived at work to find her desk cleared and her badge revoked. "You're fired," the HR manager said coldly. "Orders from above." Devastated, Clara stood on the sidewalk, the skyscraper looming like a judgment. She felt discarded again, her dreams of rising above her past crushed. But as she turned to leave, a soft-spoken colleague, Anna, slipped her a USB drive. "I overheard Mariana on a call," Anna whispered. "She admitted to framing you and attacking Gabriel months ago. It's all recorded here." Clara's hands shook as she took the drive, hope and fear colliding. She rushed to a nearby cafe, listening to the recording through earphones. Mariana's voice was unmistakable. "Clara's the perfect scapegoat, and Gabriel, that alley hit was supposed to end him, not just knock him out." The words ignited a fire in Clara. She wasn't just fighting for her name now, she was fighting for Gabriel, for justice, for the life she'd dared to dream of. But the stakes were higher than she knew. Mariana's investigator, tailing Clara, reported her every move, and Mariana's next call was chilling. "If Clara has evidence, make sure she doesn't talk." As Clara left the cafe, clutching the USB drive, a black car idled across the street, its driver watching her with cold intent. Clara's resolve hardened. She'd been underestimated her whole life, but she wasn't invisible anymore. With Gabriel behind bars and Mariana closing in, Clara faced a choice: run and protect herself or risk everything to expose the truth. The city's pulse thrummed around her, a battleground of power and survival, and Clara, the woman who'd once sifted through trash for hope, was ready to fight for her future. Clara's breath caught as she clutched the USB drive, its weight heavier than the recyclables she'd hauled for years, each step from the cafe echoing with the threat of Mariana's words on the recording. "If Clara has evidence, make sure she doesn't talk." The São Paulo streets buzzed with evening life, vendors hawking grilled meat, buses rumbling past, but Clara felt eyes on her, the black car's shadow lingering in her peripheral vision. She ducked into a crowded market, weaving through stalls, her heart racing as she scanned for Anna. They'd agreed to meet at Anna's apartment to copy the recordings and plan their next move, but Clara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Bring the drive to the old factory on Rua Sombra alone or Anna pays. Her stomach dropped. Anna had been taken. Clara's first instinct was to run to the police, but Mariana's influence ran deep. Cops could be bought, and a wrong move might cost Anna's life. She thought of Gabriel, locked in a cell, his green eyes pleading for her to fight. Clara straightened, her mother's words about courage in the face of cruelty stealing her. She made a copy of the recording at a street vendor's computer stall, slipping the duplicate into her shoe, then headed to the factory, its rusted skeleton looming under a moonless sky. Inside, the air was stale, machinery casting jagged shadows. A hulking man introduced as Vito, Mariana's hired muscle, stood guard, Anna tied to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. "Clara, don't!" Anna cried, but Vito silenced her with a glare. "The drive," he growled. Clara held it up, her voice steady despite her fear. "Let her go first." Vito smirked, but before he could act, Mariana emerged from the shadows, her designer heels clicking, her face a mask of cold triumph. "You're smarter than I thought, Clara," she said, taking the drive, "but not smart enough." Clara's eyes flicked to Anna, then back to Mariana. "You tried to kill Gabriel," she said, buying time. "You framed me. Why?" Mariana laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Gabriel was weak, letting sentiment cloud his judgment. This company is mine by right. I built it while he played hero. And you? You're just collateral." Clara's anger flared, but she kept her cool, noticing Vito's distracted glance at his phone. She tipped off a trusted favela contact, Luis, to alert the police with the duplicate recording if she didn't return in an hour. "You're wrong about Gabriel," Clara said, stepping closer. "And you underestimated me." Mariana's smile faltered as Clara lunged, grabbing a metal pipe from the floor and swinging it at Vito's knees. He roared, stumbling, and Clara freed Anna, shoving her toward the exit. "Run!" she shouted. Anna hesitated, but bolted as Vito regained his footing, lunging at Clara. She dodged, her years of navigating cluttered alleys giving her an edge, but Mariana drew a small pistol, her voice icy. "Enough!" Clara froze, hands raised, but her eyes burned with defiance. "You can kill me, but the truth's already out," she said. Mariana's brow furrowed, and in that moment, sirens wailed outside. Luis had come through. Police stormed the factory, weapons drawn, and Mariana's composure cracked. "You little—" she snarled, but officers tackled her, the pistol clattering away. Vito was cuffed, and Clara sank to her knees, relief flooding her as Anna rushed back unharmed. The recording, played for the police, exposed Mariana's crimes: fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. By dawn, Gabriel was released, his face etched with exhaustion as he found Clara outside the station. Her blouse torn but her spirit unbroken, he pulled her into a fierce hug, his voice thick. "You saved me, Clara. Again." She pulled back, her eyes searching his. "I did it for me too, for the truth." Gabriel's gaze softened, but Clara held up a hand. "We need to talk, Gabriel, but not now." He nodded, respecting her space, though his heart ached to bridge the gap. Over the next week, Mariana's arrest dominated headlines, Santos techs, board scrambling to restore trust. Clara was reinstated, her role expanded, but she kept Gabriel at arm's length, wrestling with her feelings. One evening, as she sorted recyclables in the favela, Gabriel appeared, his suit swapped for jeans, his face earnest. "Clara, I've done something," he said, handing her a newspaper. The headline read, "Gabriel Santos donates half his fortune to Favela Education Fund." Her breath caught. Below, another article announced the Clara Almeida Foundation, dedicated to job training for recyclers. "I don't want to save you," Gabriel said, his voice raw. "I want to stand with you, as equals." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her walls crumbling. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I love you," he said simply, "and I was a fool to leave you." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "Love's not enough, Gabriel. We're still worlds apart." He took her hand, the cufflink with GS glinting in his pocket. Then let's build a new world together. Clara's heart raced, memories of their nights under the stars clashing with the pain of his departure. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing. "Prove it," she said, her voice a challenge. Gabriel smiled, undaunted. "I will." Months later, at a small favela wedding, Clara walked down an aisle of recycled flowers, her dress simple but radiant, Gabriel waiting in a modest suit. The Clara Almeida Foundation thrived, transforming lives, while Gabriel worked beside her, his wealth now a tool for change, not division. As they exchanged vows, the favela cheered, their worlds united by respect and love. Clara looked into Gabriel's green eyes, seeing not a billionaire or a stranger, but the man who'd chosen her and she him. Their kiss sealed a promise of equality, of hope, of a future forged from the scraps of their past. 2 years later, Clara and Gabriel stood hand in hand in the favela, now vibrant with new schools and workshops funded by their foundation. Clara, a respected advocate, wore her recycled craft necklace, her shop thriving nearby. Gabriel, no longer a distant mogul, taught kids to code, his eyes bright with purpose. The community bustled around them, their love a bridge between worlds. As children laughed and music played, Clara whispered, "We built this together." Gabriel kissed her forehead, the lion tattoo a quiet reminder of their journey. Their shared dream, born from scraps, had resh.